welcome to Wisdom for the Wilderness podcast, a weekly podcast of Overland Church where we talk about the Bible, theology, cultural topics, topics that just are pertinent to the Christian life. And so, today we're going to talk about something like a continuation of the past couple weeks. We're going to talk about engagement and early years of marriage. And
Right.
so
we talked about singleness. We talked about dating. The next step is to actually tie the knot. So
we're going to talk about that, and then after we talk about engagement in the early years of marriage, we're going to kind of depart from this series. We'd love to pick back up on marriage, but we just got some other things we really feel are important to talk about right now, the life of our church and the life of just where we are in culture. And so we've got some other things we want to talk about. So I'm looking forward to jumping into today's topic. Josh and I, both pastors for a lot of years, we've walked with a lot of couples through engagement, weddings, and marriages. And so if you were going to guess, how many weddings have you been to as a pastor?
Been to or performed the ceremony?
Been involved with, whether it was premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, maybe a dozen, so probably not as much as you. I pastored an older congregation, so it wasn't as much in the past, but probably about a dozen or more.
Yeah, I have no clue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bunch.
Yeah.
And we've walked through, every year, Jennifer and I are walking with multiple couples. Obviously, the first couple years of planting here, not so many, more back in Kentucky.
Yep.
We would travel back for weddings. So,
yeah.
But nonetheless, we've done quite a few weddings and been a part of this process and have watched couples walk through it. Some of them very successfly, and sometimes it's a dumpster fire. And so, this is one that I really feel like I have a lot of wisdom here because I've wrestled with couples through this quite a bit.
People always, at least pastors, when we talk to one another, would you rather do a wedding or a funeral?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I had Herschel York say one time in a staff meeting, he just was very adamant, I'd much rather do a funeral than a wedding. And I remember Adam Bishop and I were sitting there going, man, that just shouldn't be. We should celebrate weddings. And I've learned, what he said, I get why he says it. Because, man, the wedding, they're just, it's all about show. It's it's the celebration where you're up there talking and no one's listening to you. The cultural expectation, you've got Bridezilla, worse than Bridezilla is Mamazilla. And when you do a funeral, people are listening to what you have to say. However, man, I you bring that up. You ask that question. I think weddings are just beautiful. They should be a picture of Christ and his church.
Right.
All weddings aren't equal. Some weddings are just extremely godly and glorify the Lord, and others really glorify the couple, the bride.
Yeah. In general, I prefer doing a funeral, not because I like people dying, but you said, people are focused. They're listening. You have the pastoral function to comfort, and a lot of times in the way we do weddings, it just is you're just there because you have to be there. As a pastor, you're not really seen as leading the worship service, which is what a wedding ought to be.
Yeah.
So I think weddings would be a lot more enjoyable as a pastor if our people understood what they are, how we ought to do them, why we're doing them, rather than making them what we've made them in this culture.
Yeah. So let's talk about engagement and then how the conversations that a couple are going to need to have around a wedding.
Yeah.
And then let's talk through the actual kind of preparation for the wedding.
Right.
And then let's talk about those early years of marriage.
Okay.
So let me just ask you a question about engagement. So last week we asked the question, is dating a biblical concept?
Yeah.
Is engagement a biblical concept?
Certainly much more of a biblical concept because we have betrothal and we have those kind of arranged marriages where you are expecting to marry this person, but it's a very different situation than our modern form of engagement. It's much more family involved.
Right. So if we look at, we can see examples in scripture being betrothed, like David and Michael, I believe it
Right.
was, right? Saul's. And then Joseph and Mary would be the most famous
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So what did it mean to be betrothed?
To be betrothed is like engagement, but it's much more serious. So if we read Matthew chapter 1, Joseph is betrothed to marry Mary, but when he finds out she's pregnant, he's going to divorce her quietly. And so, in our modern version of engagement, you don't have to get a divorce if you want to break it off. Uh, but the contract of that you're going to be married is seen as so firm in society that it's a divorce to end it, even though the marriage has not yet been actually consummated.
Right. So that's a legal matter of sorts.
Right.
Where if we break off an engagement, it's a broken heart and some wasted money.
Yep. Yep.
It's a Taylor Swift song.
Yeah. Do you
But
have to give the toaster back when
right,
somebody gave?
right.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely a different
Yeah.
thing. For us, we think about engagement. It's making serious those intentions. You know, you're putting a ring on it. That's what
Hmm.
you put a ring on it, and I've heard guys joke around and like, oh, don't count till there's two. Like it's got to be double banded before she's taken off the
That's
market,
right. That's right.
which is dirty, man. That's dirty. But it's a sign, and so yeah, this is showing your intentions. It's making it where when we're engaged, we're now planning
Hmm.
to be married.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think we brought this up a little bit last week, but how long should a couple be engaged? And there's
Yeah.
no one answer,
No.
but
No.
put some wisdom on it.
As short as possible. As short as reasonably possible. I think back to my own life. So Stacy and I, we met each other. We didn't really date. We weren't like a couple. I asked her to marry me. Her parents felt like it was rushed. And as a parent now, I understand that maybe a little more than I did back then. But they required us to be engaged for a year. We were actually engaged 13 months between engagement and wedding. And that was probably the worst year of my life.
It's hard, huh?
Yeah, it's just hard. It's really hard to be in that limbo period, psychologically, emotionally, and of course, temptation wise,
Yeah,
where you're going to spend the rest of your life with this woman, but you're not there yet,
right. Yeah,
and it's a horrible situation to be in. In being engaged, like I do not understand people who are engaged for 5 years and things like it. Just is
right.
a horrible limbo state that you just want to get through as quickly as possible to what you're
Right.
actually aiming
And
towards.
I think the reality is most couples who are engaged 5 years are sexually
Yeah,
active.
they're acting married.
They're acting married in a lot
Yeah.
of different ways, and they aren't. Which
Yep.
again, we know one, it's a sin against a holy
Yep.
God who tells us the right way to do it and gives us incredible wisdom in how to do it. So
Yep.
that's the first thing I want to say.
Yeah.
Like there God and his holiness, the wisdom he gives us in the Bible, it's what's right and it's what's good.
Yep.
And you hear me say this so often. These things glorify God when we live in obey what he gives us. It
Right.
glorifies God.
Right.
But it is also for our good.
Yes.
He just knows better than we do.
Yeah.
He knows better than the world. So,
Yep.
the fact that we're sitting here and saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have sex before you're married," that's just not worldly wisdom. But man, it is wisdom.
Yeah.
It's godly wisdom, and it's better. So,
Yeah.
I understand that some people listening to this, you're going, "This is just these Christians. They're crazy." Well, I want you to understand, we believe this,
Yeah.
and we believe this enough to say, "Yeah, we're not going to have
Yeah.
sex."
Yep.
And sex it's a gift, but it's a
Yep.
gift for the married couple.
Yes.
And I realize that puts us at odds with a lot of people who are listening, but
Mhm.
that's how they're doing it. So
Yeah.
so we're talking about people we're saying we're Christian. We really want to live out our faith. We want to be obedient to the commands of Christ.
Yep.
We so value Christ's work on the cross for our sins, his atonement for our sins. We're new creations in Christ. We're going to live different, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's where that's coming from. So
Yeah.
so you and I, when we're saying as short as possible, we're saying for the sake of our good and
Yes.
godliness and
Yes.
God's glory. Now, what we're
Yeah.
not saying is rush into marriage
Right.
ignorantly.
Right. And you do need enough time that you can get the proper premarital counseling
Right.
and preparation for marriage. So, 2 weeks is probably not going to be
That's right.
wise because you need your pastors and wise people to walk you through
Right.
this step you're about to take.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so I,
let me note, like we're primarily speaking to the people in our church who are in
right.
this season of life who are in their 20s,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
have not been married. I
Yeah.
realize we have we'll have divorced people who are married, and we would maybe talk through two divorced couples getting married in a different way. And
Yeah.
we've got some different landmines to
Yeah.
work through when we
Yeah.
would talk about that.
Yeah.
But we're primarily talking to people who've not been married
Right.
yet,
Right.
who are young.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so that's primarily who we're talking about. So, a short engagement. That means if there is a reason that you can't get engaged or you can't be married for a certain amount of time, we're just saying delay engagement
Yeah.
until you're
Yeah.
putting it into a healthy time frame.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, now, again, I mentioned this last week. We were 6 months from the time we started dating to the time we were married.
Yeah.
Our engagement was mid October. We were married in January,
Right.
and uh, you know, both working.
Mm.
Jennifer's working a full time job. I was working as if it was a full time job, and in school, right,
Yeah.
and pulled off a wedding
Right.
that fast. And man, our church and our families just chipped in around us and
Right.
helped make it happen, which was a beautiful thing when your church and friends and your family help
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
So, um, y so in that we got a question to ask. So, how does a young man know? All right, it's time to propose,
Mm.
and uh, what type of ring should he buy? How much? We called that a rock fund. You got a rock
Uh-huh.
fund going. Like you
Yeah.
start dating a girl, get serious. All of a sudden, like you're stowing away some cash to buy a
Uh-huh.
ring.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about the ring.
Okay. All right. Clarity. What are the things that we're supposed to notice about the diamond? I don't remember.
I don't
That
even.
was a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think in the world they're saying like a year and a half salary.
Right.
That's insane. That is absolutely insane.
Right.
And honestly, as a woman, who wants to be carrying that much money around on their finger
You're,
with the possibility of losing it down the drain?
I think you're speaking like somebody who's lived in a foreign on the mission field in a foreign country, and I was like, they'll chop your finger off for that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. I just know Jennifer would have, and she would tell you this. I'm not speaking for her here, but
Yeah.
she would have rather been married and had a small ring than waited for me to
Right.
make the money to have a big one.
yes,
And I've looked at her wedding ring the other day. We are 18 years into marriage, and I looked at her wedding ring, and man, it's wear and tear on it. And I said,
Uh-huh.
honey, I should maybe for your 20th, I'll get you a new ring. And she was like, well, that'd be a waste of money. I like this one.
yeah,
Yeah. Like
yeah. We've
um,
had that exact same conversation
she
actually.
she it reminds me of
Yeah.
So it's a small ring. It wasn't I think I paid like $1,800 for it,
Yeah.
$1,500
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah,
And we also bought 2 kayaks at the same time. We joked that was part of it, and we've used those kayaks and still have those kayaks.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I'd say you need to do something that hurts you a little bit. Like
That's right.
it needs to not be absolutely cheap and easy.
Absolutely.
Needs to be some sacrifice to it in the expression. And so, if you're 20, that's different from if you're 25, 26 and got a
That's right.
$90,000 a year job versus you're living on $20,000. I mean,
Right.
that's very different. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a reasonableness to it.
Right.
That you don't have to expect to have a carat and a half. I was happy I got her 5/8, so that was more than
Right.
half.
Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think it does. You do want to make a sacrifice because
Yeah.
you're showing her, man, I love you, and I'm
Yeah.
giving this gift. I think, and I'm horrible at this kind of thing, but like the guys who are just so attentive to the likes of their fiance,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, she's gonna like this design, and
Yeah.
the guys who can pull off like getting the grandmother or something from the
Yeah.
grandmother's ring,
Yeah.
use like those guys to me are dealing with the hot sauce, man. I'm like, I admire those guys, and so I
Uh-huh.
think meaning
Yeah.
matters,
Yeah.
importance matters. I think, um, the proposal and all that stuff. You should be thoughtful in it, and you should want to do it. I mean, I failed pretty bad at all these things. I've got some funny stories. I won't share them, but like what I had planned and what happened were two totally different
Uh-huh.
different things. But we look back very fondly on uh, uh, our engagement and our
Yeah.
proposal, and there was meaning to it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, think through it romantically, yeah, and
Yeah.
show her. I want to win her over, like
Right.
Um, we talked earlier about in the previous podcast about kind of shooting your shot and being
Yeah.
bold. But when it comes to engagement, like you should know
You
that
sh
she's gonna say
you
yes.
should pretty much
No,
know. Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
not saying you've got to have the conversation ahead of time, but
Right.
like there should be no doubt that you love her and she loves you
Yep.
if you're making this
Yeah.
this step.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
How about asking dad?
yeah, I think it's situational.
Yep.
Um, I'm generally going to say, yeah, you should ask dad and talk to dad and
Yeah.
and get his blessing. There should be a relationship. Where I would say it's situational is when dad's not in the picture, or
Right.
has no,
Right.
dad's been absent
Yeah.
from life, and
Yeah.
and you're going to know that
Yeah.
by talking to your spouse if you need to. And I would say if dad's not in the picture, then talk to mom. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to show her that you respect her parents. You want to show their parents that you respect them.
Yes.
Not saying there's a 100%
It
that
it's possible that the parents say no and you still go forward in some situations.
right. That's
Especially if the parents are non-believers
right.
and they have different reasons and standards than you and your girlfriend
Yeah.
as believers. But generally, you want everybody on board. They're the ones who brought her into the world,
Right.
and you want
Yeah.
their approval and blessing.
So, like, best case scenario, perfect world, you're marrying a girl that's got a godly family and a godly dad that loves her, and you're going to build a relationship with him, and you're going to talk to him, and there is wisdom in that. Perfect world. But
Yeah.
I would say if you're in a situation where it's not the perfect scenario, that you probably just meet with one of your pastors, one of your
Yeah.
mentors, somebody's discipling you, and talk through it with them. Like
Yeah.
get somebody else's wisdom and not just your own
Right.
as you
Right.
think through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And even not just people in your life, but especially people in her life. So if she has a spiritual family that has
Yeah.
kind of replaced her physical family, then go to them and say, I really am thinking about asking her to marry me. What do you think?
Yeah.
And get that approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about, I think, one of the more important things. Once she says yes,
Yeah.
and um once it's a go, right? And what are the next steps? And I think one of the first steps should be uh coming and talking to your pastors
Right.
and getting it on their radar,
Yes. Yes.
because we want to talk through premarital counseling,
Right.
and we want to talk through wedding. I don't have this happen often, um, but I love talking to couples on the very front end,
Yes.
because I think there's some real mistakes um, that can be made in the wedding planning process, and so
Yes.
go
Yes.
go early on and do that. And I'll tell you, like, talking to a wedding planner isn't the person to talk to, because they're making profit
Right.
from it,
Right.
and the
Yeah.
better and more magnificent your wedding looks, the more you spend on it, the better they look.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I would just love for us to be able to speak some wisdom onto that. So let me do that. We'll go to the planning of the marriage in a second, but let's first just talk about premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Um,
How many sessions do you typically do?
so I I would say 6 to 8
6 to 8.
is healthy.
Yeah.
Now, there's different methods, different
Yeah.
people. We at our church, Jennifer and I have been doing most of them,
Yeah.
and we've done this a lot. And we kind of sit down with you in the beginning, and we start poking around until we hear you say ouch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we hear you say ouch, we're gonna pull back the scab and figure out why you said ouch. And we're
Yeah.
gonna dive in. that's probably it's worked for us, but as a church, as like we're really recruiting, like we can't at this point do all the premarital
Right.
counseling. We have too
Yep.
many couples
Yep.
getting married. So we're probably going to start using some curriculum, and I
Mhm.
think there's some curriculums that probably do a way better job than I do
Mm.
myself. So
Yeah.
here's what I would say though: the timing is important
Right.
because let's say you've got a year engagement, we probably need to sit down some right now in the beginning, once or
Yeah.
twice and talk, but we really then need to wait
Right.
because I don't want like I don't I don't want you to forget the stuff we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there's some things early on that we can kind of help you figure out and get pointed in the right direction.
Yeah.
But then there's going to be some other things that we need to wait on even
Right.
up until right before. I mean,
Yeah.
I think every pastor does this trick where we don't talk about sex until
Right before.
before,
Yeah.
and really explicit. And
Yeah.
I know um, there's a lot of lore that's happened around Jennifer and I's sex talk and how it comes back to couples, and some of the brides have told other brides in the past, like, oh man, Jennifer's a rock star. You
Yeah.
want to listen to Jennifer. She's got so much wisdom, and she's the rock
Yeah.
star in our premarital
Yep.
counseling. But there's you need to do it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's one of the things I would say. Like, there's
Yeah.
none that's going to be perfect,
Absolutely.
but you need to do it.
Yeah.
And have you ever done any like postmarital,
Yeah.
like pretty quick after the wedding?
Not quick after the
Oh,
wedding. No, just further down when
I,
crisis counseling and
yeah,
things.
we have had a few couples take us up on this,
Okay.
where we've said, listen, so much of what we're telling you is theory right now.
Yeah.
But after you get married, you're going to figure out real quick, oh, this isn't theory
Yeah.
anymore. And
Yeah.
you're going to start hitting these first hiccups. And the pattern that you're going to establish when you hit those first fights, and I'll use the word fight because it will
Yeah.
be a fight.
Yeah.
Come back in, sit down with us.
Yep.
Let's talk and wrestle through it.
Yep.
And we've had a few couples take us up on it, and we've done some post
Mhm.
wedding counseling as they really start hitting the first challenges in
Yeah.
their marriage, and I think it's pretty helpful.
That is helpful because I mean, we've been married 18 years, going on 19 too. So you have the same fight over and
Yep.
over and over again. Yeah, it really comes down to your different personalities, and you just have that same fight over different things,
Right.
different circumstances over and over again. So if you can get on the head end of that and sort through that, then it's not going to become like crystallized into bitterness,
Right.
which causes lasting damage to
That's right.
marriages.
That's right. Yeah, I remember early on, um, I was using some verbiage. I was saying things I didn't mean. I didn't mean it how it was coming across. Now the words I was using, words have meaning, and the
Yeah.
way that what I was saying, Jennifer was taking me literally,
Yeah.
and it hurt her. And
Yeah.
I really wish I could have had like let somebody else in on, hey, we're having this problem,
Yeah.
and somebody would have said to me, "Stop saying that, stupid." you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like literally, you're being stupid. And
Yeah.
so I think that's helpful. So premarital counseling, there are some major things that everybody's going to talk about
Right.
in premarital counseling. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk
Yes.
about um, in-laws, leaving and cleaving, which
Yeah.
I do want to talk about leaving and cleaving a little bit in the end of this podcast.
Communication.
Communication,
Yep.
expectations. Sex. There's things we're going to all talk about, but I do think it's helpful when you're not just watching a video, but you're really
Mhm.
sitting down with somebody, a married couple with wisdom,
Right.
and they're finding out and looking and observing. This is really where they need help.
Yeah.
So that's an important piece. Next is you're going to start planning the wedding
Yeah.
in engagement.
Yeah.
And so um, there's a lot to say here, and this is a bit
Absolutely.
of a soapbox for me.
Me too. Me too.
Okay.
Yep. So we may have two soapboxes here.
Yeah.
My soapbox is make weddings small again. I mean, that's if I
Yeah.
could put it on a red hat, that's what it would say. Make weddings small again.
Yeah.
Like our generation, millennials, are really, I think, the front edge of like blowing up the wedding out of complete proportion.
Yeah.
So today, it's Pinterest. Back then it was the magazines and say yes to the dress
Yeah.
and all
So
that stuff.
when we were early 2000s, there were these shows on TLC
Yep.
that were Say Yes to the Dress, 4 weddings, where they would take 4 weddings and they would compare them. And then, then you move from, and this actually, I think, plays into it. You move from, we're so old, dude. We're so old. Makes me feel so stupid. But you move from film pictures, a photographer taking pictures on film, to taking digital pictures that were
Right.
more easily shared.
Yep.
And so for years, your wedding pictures just ended up, in a photo album on somebody on your coffee table,
Yeah.
collecting dust, and all of a sudden they're online, and we're looking at this like fairy tale story.
Right. Yep.
And so definitely it blew it up.
Yeah. I mean, my parents got married in Hardin Baptist Church, and then had a reception with like the little mints and punch.
Peanuts.
Yeah,
Can't even do that anymore. Peanut allergies. But
yeah, in the fellowship hall, and it
Right.
was all, I don't know what they spent money on, flowers in the dress.
Right.
That was pretty much it.
Right.
Whereas now we're spending 20, 30, 40, $50,000 on weddings.
Average cost, I looked this up.
Okay.
Did a little research. I looked this up, but average cost is about $35,000 on a wedding. And that's average, meaning there's a lot of people spending well over that.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some spending under that.
Well, as the father of 2 girls, they are going to be below average.
Right. So
you don't have to worry about this.
I don't. Two boys. I don't necessarily have to worry about it within our within American tradition. So let's talk about it. I mean, we talk about weddings in the Bible. We see the first miracle happen.
Yeah.
It's at a wedding, and it's an incredible celebration.
Right.
So shouldn't our weddings be incredible celebrations?
So yeah,
Prescriptive versus descriptive. We get to teach you something.
Right.
Here.
Yeah. So prescriptive is there's certain things in the Bible that are prescribed that you should do, and descriptive is sometimes the Bible's just telling us what happened.
Right.
And it isn't saying you need to do this. And so the classic example is polygamy, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times the Bible just describes the polygamy without saying this was wrong. In each individual story. But if you zoom out to the bigger picture, then you realize, oh, polygamy is against God's design, and that's why it never works out.
Right.
So, I mean, don't have polygamous weddings. That's one thing.
That's very clear.
Yes. But you do see the wedding at Cana, this huge, multi-day event. And you could say, well, that's prescriptive. I don't think it is.
No, it's descriptive.
It's descriptive.
It's describing something that happened.
Yes.
And Jesus used it to a miracle, to first miracle.
Yeah.
But it's not saying have a huge wedding. So we really don't see a prescriptive command in Christ.
Well, the only prescriptive wedding we see is Genesis 2.
That's right.
Where a man leaves his father and mother and he holds fast to his wife and the two become one flesh.
Yeah.
And that is prescribed. That's what marriage is. This is what a wedding recognizes to the community.
Right. In New Testament, we do see that this is a picture of Christ and the church.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about, we're in the book of Ephesians, so we're going to see that as we're preaching through the book of Ephesians, like exactly what this means, but this is a picture of Christ and his church.
And so I'd say, the first thing about weddings to understand that many people don't understand is that a wedding is a worship service.
That's right.
It is not about you, it is about God. And it's about the people of God. And this is where we mess up with our expressive individualism. We want to make it, about our fairy tale and about expressing ourselves and being really special about who we are. And really what our wedding should be is less about the ways we're different and more about the ways we're the same. That we are all submitting to this institution that has been created by God, and we're standing as a man and a woman going all the way back to the garden before God, and God is bringing this man and this woman together as one within the witness of a community. And so that's the essentials.
Yeah.
And that's what often gets lost in the pageantry of modern weddings.
Right. Yeah. I think it's become part of the American dream.
Right.
Right. So when And this is not like no guy's dreaming about this. This is the girl part of the young girl's American dream, and this
Yeah.
is she's thinking of her wedding. The problem that's come again because of the TV shows and then social media, Instagram is now it's a comparison to
Yes.
everybody's else's. And
Yes.
so if our wedding isn't this way or
Right.
that way, we're not gonna look good. I mean, who cares how
Right.
you look? You want a good wedding, and so many couples make. I mean, not a good wedding, a good marriage.
Right.
So many couples make the mistake of focusing more on the preparation for the actual wedding day and ceremony
Yeah.
than to be a good husband or a good wife.
Yep. Yep.
And you want to do that.
Yeah.
You want to um, be prepared to be a good husband or good
Yeah.
wife. Not
Yeah.
like you're gonna remember so little about the ceremony.
Yeah.
So many
Yeah.
of the things that you're preparing for that day, other people are gonna enjoy, but they're also just gonna go home and compare it to somebody else's
Right.
or whatever else, no matter how well you do
Right.
it. And so
Yeah.
really shouldn't be worried about trying to please everybody else.
Yeah.
Please the Lord in it.
Yeah. And this goes back to what you said about the wedding planner. You need to understand that the wedding planner is not in charge of that ceremony.
That's right.
The pastor is.
That's right.
So if it comes down to the wedding planner wants something a certain way and the pastor says no,
Yeah.
then it is the pastor's role to lead that worship service.
Yeah.
And the wedding planner is there, and a lot of them don't understand this,
Right.
because they're working mainly in secular, non-believing
That's
weddings.
right.
But they need to understand they're there to support, to make sure everybody knows like where to go and when to be there. But it is the pastor who is leading this worship service in a way that honors God.
Right.
And if we say, no, we're not doing this, or this isn't happening this way, there's a reason behind it
Yeah.
because this is about the Lord first and foremost, and we don't think that's glorifying to God for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our wedding, there was a few things that I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure the gospel was
Right.
shared because Jennifer was a teacher at the time, and she had invited all of her students. She invited all of her coworkers. We invited our whole church. It was just in the bulletin. Like it was in the
Mm,
bulletin. Like here's the Thurman wedding. You're invited.
yeah.
Everyone was invited, and that was beautiful, by the way, because we wanted the church. Like these are the people we live life
Right.
with. These
Yeah.
are the people, and we had family drive in, but I'm like, those family aren't holding us accountable. Like we had
Right.
cousins and people that we love and care about, but they're not the people we're living life with. Like we wanted the church there, but we also wanted to be a witness of who Christ is. And
Right.
so before Jennifer came down the aisle, and before any of the bridal party walked in, I walked out on stage and I addressed the crowd,
Yeah.
and I actually preached
Yeah.
a little mini sermonette sharing the gospel. And then the bridal party comes in. Jennifer walks into "In Christ Alone,"
Yeah.
and man, you're talking about a beautiful moment. And boy, that song still gets me.
Yeah.
Um, because we're saying, I'm not finding my hope and my salvation
Right.
in this spouse,
Mm,
her in me or me in her,
yeah.
but in Christ. And it was beautiful. But then, man, our good friends, Todd and Sarah Thomas led
Mm,
us in worship with
yeah.
three or four songs. And then, Dr. York gets up there and did a beautiful job, proclaiming the meaning of marriage and challenging us. And, I do think that was a ceremony that glorified God.
Yeah.
And from every song, every word spoken, every prayer read. And so when I see Christian couples that want to bring in secular music
Uh-huh.
and
Brad Paisley.
right or right whoever, like, and then we call it their arts and crafts,
Oh, like if you're doing sand and
whatever, tying a
different things.
knot,
Yeah.
melting can, whatever.
Yeah.
Funny story is that I did one of Piper's nephew's weddings,
Okay.
and he and his wife did. They poured glass frits, so like little
Okay.
pieces of glass
Uh-huh.
together, and then they were going to have it blown into like a bowl or a candle and put it on the coffee table later.
Yeah.
And so they poured a little in, so it's like mixing sand.
Right.
But when they did it, the two colors they picked were purple and black and to make the bowl. And they were like, "Yeah, can you just like say something about the meaning of those colors?" And I'm like, "The meaning of those colors." And
What?
so like I look it up and I'm like, "This color's like doesn't have good meaning." So I just made it all up. I just made it all up. And I laughed about it in my head the whole time I was doing it. This
Yeah.
many years in, and somebody asked me to do that, to go, "No, I'm
No.
not doing that." What about communion at weddings? You got a thought?
I don't do communion at weddings. I don't know about you, but it's a church ordinance to be taken in the local church in our regular worship service. I wouldn't do it in youth group. I wouldn't do it at camp. I do it as the church.
Same.
Yeah.
And man, a lot of couples come and they want to do communion, and they have
Yeah.
and I have, I think again early on, I think I have done it, uh, but I had stopped. I haven't done it but maybe once or twice if I recall,
Yeah.
um, in maybe different circumstances. But I have, yeah, I really discourage
Yeah.
couples from doing it because it is an ordinance for the church. Um, it's not the time or place. They have pure desire.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's representing the same love that we're representing in the marriage, but it's not the proper location for it.
Right.
And there's an element of church discipline in the Lord's Supper that can't be practiced in a wedding ceremony.
Yeah.
So there are people who are supposed to be excluded from the table because they are under church discipline, and that's being policed by your local church.
Right.
Not You can't do that in a wedding ceremony that isn't perfectly representative of a specific local church, and it's all these different people and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah. So, couples get creative, and I mean, you have foot washings, you got all sorts of
yeah,
different things. And
yeah,
again, go talk to your pastor on the front, the person who's doing that ceremony. Go talk to him on the front end and
yeah.
ask for their wisdom well ahead before you
How
make a
about
decision.
writing your own vows?
Oh man, this is another one.
Yeah,
Um, I will let couples write their own vows and read them to each other beforehand or whatever. Sometimes maybe once or twice during the ceremony after I've read them, but I insist on my own vows being I use a very traditional
yeah,
vows put in modern language.
yeah, yeah,
There's certain elements I want them to say. We've got a
yeah,
young couple in our church that's been married, not even a year yet, that wrote their own vows,
mm,
and they did a beautiful job with
yeah,
it. But by and large, when couples
yeah.
do it, they sit down and go, "Oh, this was a horrible idea. What was I
Yeah.
thinking?"
Yeah. So we did I wrote our vows, but I regret it now. And the vows were biblical. And they're very biblically based. They contain basically everything the traditional Book of Common Prayer
Yeah,
English vows have. But now I don't even remember what we said. Like I could go look it up, like I have it somewhere. But there's something again special about saying the same thing that
right.
every couple before you back to the 1500s in England have said,
Yeah,
and knowing just instinctively because you've heard it at basically every wedding, like this is what I promised
right.
you,
That's right.
till death do us part.
Right.
Like certain phrases in sickness and in health, like those things being like completely on your mind, unchanged from previous generations before you, generations that are coming behind you. I would, if I could go back and change one thing about my wedding, that's what it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is great wisdom in that. And that's why, like, I'm going to say, we're going to read these vows and I'll let you read your own. And
Yeah,
I also would just say there's like, I have watched guys in, use videos or whatever else of it when they're trying to read the vows that they wrote, or girls, they break down and cry and they can't get past it because
yeah,
it's emotional and
yep,
it's hard.
yep,
Um, I remember being pretty emotional at our wedding because I just loved Jennifer so much. It was so
yeah,
exciting. And it
yeah,
wasn't, I mean, in front of people all the time, there's no nerves in that. There was just pure love and joy
mm,
and excitement.
yeah,
And so, it's a beautiful thing. So I just want to jump back to something you said, make weddings small again.
yeah.
Um,
Maybe I should say simple.
Simple. I think that may be what you're really trying to
Yeah,
communicate. And I would agree. Make them simple again. Like, Um, we have meals now at most weddings, and that is where a ton of your cost comes
Yes.
in. Um, feeding that many people. I'm going to tell you that if you will have a reception that gets people from the wedding, and they don't have to wait hours to go to the reception.
Yep.
If you, and then again, you have a wedding however you want to have it. You want to have a
Right,
big
right, right.
wedding, a big reception, you go for it.
Yeah.
But if you will have a wedding that gets people in the reception fast and gets them some sort of uh, appetizer or food
Yep.
and finger foods, uh,
Yep.
small things that they can sit
And
around, they can
have a cake,
socialize.
not cupcakes.
And that's where I was going next. Like, and have a good cake.
Yes.
By all means, not donuts, not
Right.
cupcakes. Have a good cake. And I get it. You need to have
Yep.
some cupcakes to do gluten-free and all the dairy-free and all the
Yes.
options you got to do. That's fine. But have some good cake and get it to people. And then
Yes.
go send, like, people will love it.
Yes.
And but if people really, your church family really loves and cares for you, get them there. Get the people who are really important. I mean,
Yeah.
I see it often in weddings where, especially within wealthier families, where it's about status and symbol, and
Yeah.
they're inviting people. Your parents are like inviting people because they were invited, and they've got to keep up with the Joneses
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And man, people will be offended if they're not invited to the wedding. Like, a lot of politics gets brought into it.
Yep.
And I'm just telling you, what's really important is having the people there who you're going to go through and live life with.
Yeah.
And so,
I think there's a problem with a lot of people delaying weddings because it has to be such a big production. And even was the case in Malawi, believe it or not. People saw the expectation of having all this expense and all this big, who, whatever. And in the church, there were a lot of people that actually had never been officially married. And this is a whole nother podcast about marriage in Malawi. But um, and we kept encouraging them, like, you can just
right.
come up and have a wedding after the worship service on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Like, we are willing to do that because it's a lot more important that you make this promise before God and recognize what you're entering into than you not do it just because you don't have the funds
Right.
to have this big event.
Yeah. At this point in Overland Church's history, we've had several worship services. Several weddings on a Sunday after church.
Yeah.
Where they were just at the church, and the families came, and they invited church members, and these were often people that were already living together.
Yeah.
Same sort of
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
but realized, okay, we're living together. This is wrong. This is sinful. We want to get married. We want to do what's right before God.
Right.
Let's do it. And so the ladies of our church have, like, pitched in. They've made cakes. They've done the flowers. They've taken pictures. Yep. It's been beautiful to watch when that has happened. I'll tell you one thing, like our policy at our church, we don't allow non-members to do weddings at our church. Our church is not a great wedding venue. We're not trying to be profitable off of it. So we actually don't charge to do a wedding at our church.
Right.
We just put limits on it. So meaning, we have a limited number of seats. And so that's how many invitations, you got to, if you can hold under 180 people, welcome to have it here.
Yep.
You want to have a meal here? It's going to have to be it's got to be 50 people or under, because that's 50 people is what the space will hold 50 people. And we maybe in the summer have done it where they're able outside and it be a little bigger. But the reality is that's about what our space will hold. But because we think, okay, we want to help you get started and want to get you on the right foot.
Yeah.
It's free. We're not charging. We're not trying to profit. One thing that we did not do this at Buck Run, but when we were writing the marriage policy and I was watching people have big elaborate weddings, and they're paying the church pennies on the dime while, to what they're paying the reception hall and all these places. I'm like, well, just tithe on your wedding.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy if you only gave us $200, meaning you only spent $2,000.
Yeah.
But if you think about it that way, of like, oh, we're going to keep it small. I would tell you, if do not go in debt for your wedding.
Absolutely not.
You're so much better off to have a down payment on a house
Yeah.
and to be in a better financial position and have a small, simple wedding with a godly worship service, taking time and care into the planning and creating of that service, than you
Yeah.
are to have a big, elaborate show.
Yeah. And the wedding is about the marriage ultimately.
That's right.
The marriage shouldn't be for the wedding.
That's right.
The wedding is for the marriage.
That's right.
So, whatever you're doing needs to be a good launching pad into the lifetime
That's
rather
right.
than something that's going to be, hanging around your neck.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, we've probably said a lot on our soapbox. We'll get off of it and let's work into now
Early marriage.
early marriage.
Yes.
Yeah. So funny story, Jennifer and I. Our plan was to stay in our apartment
Mhm.
that night, and we're leave the next day to go on our honeymoon, and it was a small window, and we were just
Yeah.
going to we're actually going to a cabin over at Lake Barkley
Yep.
for
Near
3
where I'm
days.
from.
Yep, right,
Yep.
for 3 days. And
You both got sick,
things
right?
got real fast. Yeah, both of us got a stomach virus or food poisoning. One, we woke up in the middle of the night in a one bathroom apartment, sick as dogs. So sick that Jennifer had to go to the ER the
Wow.
next day, and I
Wow.
could not take her. So Mel and Chris Brewer, two dear friends, had to come, and Chris literally had to tote my bride down the steps and put her in the car. She was so sick, and she ended up in the ER beside another great friend of ours, Daniel Burles. They were beside each other, and so then a bunch of people got sick. So it was horrible. So
Yeah.
life happens fast. So once you
Yeah.
get married,
Yeah.
life is coming at you
Absolutely.
fast.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of wisdom, biblically behind the admonition in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 5, that a newly married man for the first year is not required to go to war. He's not required to take part in public, obligations for his city. The Bible recognizes that this is a precious time
Yep,
to establish this new family, that beyond the wedding, there's a lot of work to do.
that's right. You are
And
building a foundation
yes,
for the future,
yes, yes,
and the behaviors, the patterns, the rhythms that you're building in those moments are harder to change later,
yeah, yeah,
and so you want to set them up right. You want to
yeah,
be in the right place. Now listen, there are going to be circumstances where you're working second shift, you're
right,
working third shift, and it's hard. But do the best with with what you have
yeah,
to establish a godly marriage.
right,
Get those routines, man. I would just make sure you're going to church every week. Make
yes,
sure you're involved in small groups. Make
yes,
sure you're involved in ministry
yeah,
together. And that's the foundations of
yeah,
a good life.
yeah. But beyond that, make sure you're not adding a lot of extras to your life
Yeah.
especially in that first year.
Yeah.
And guys, you've got to say no to, com- going out with the guys regularly, every week or something like
Right.
you have to focus
Yeah.
your time and energy on one another during that first year.
I hear stories about guys that their wives want to spend time with them, and they're playing on video games online with their friends, and
Yeah.
their wives going, well, why won't he pay me attention? No, dude, put down the video
Yep.
games and pay your wife
Yep.
attention.
Yep.
Um, y- Put the hobby down and
Yeah.
do stuff with your wife, whether it's I pick on myself, like whether it's hunting or
Right.
fishing or something like that. Put it down and spend time and build that foundation
Or
with your
do it
wife.
together
Yeah, yeah,
rather than isolating yourself and being apart for
yeah.
reasons like that.
And then there comes these first days where you're truly learning to leave and cleave.
Yeah.
That we would talk about this a ton in premarital counseling, but the two are leaving their father and mother and they're becoming one flesh. He's holding fast to his wife.
Yep.
And so it stinks for the parents, but you've got to put some distance in those early years and those early times between you and your family. Putting the right parameters, the right guardrails in
Yeah.
place, sure. you can be with your family. Um, every man who gets married needs to know his mom needs to know. The guy's mom needs to know, Mom, if you make me pick
Right.
between her and you, I'm picking my wife every time.
Right.
He,
Right.
he needs to lay that groundwork because it's
Yeah.
hard for the mom to let go of her boy. It's hard to
Yep.
stop parenting. And moms, if you're listening to this, when your son gets married, he doesn't want a mama
Yeah. Yep.
anymore. He
Yep.
wants a mom.
Yep.
He doesn't want somebody wiping his mouth or saying, "Oh, you've got something on your ear." Or, you start treating him like a man,
Yeah.
and he needs to treat you
Yeah, and
with a level of
you
respect.
can't feel like it's competition between his wife and you.
Yeah,
You are out of the picture essentially. Like you've
right.
got to fill this new role, and the best thing for the son you love is to teach him to focus his energy and his love and his affection on his wife.
Yeah,
And that's going to create a stable marriage, a happy marriage, and that's what you want them to have. But sometimes these mama emotions
right,
get in the way of what's actually good.
right. That's right. I think that for the parents who their kids are getting married, like your goal should be to become your daughter-in-law or son-in-law's biggest fan
Yeah.
and to stay out of the way and to support them and just love them. You need to learn them and
Yeah.
know how to love them
Yep.
and don't make assumptions. And then you should be the number one cheerleader for their marriage to succeed.
Yes.
Now, I see it happen a lot where that's not the case. Like
Mm.
when your little girl comes home and she goes, "He's a horrible dude," all of a sudden you're actually pulling for their marriage to fall apart.
Yeah.
You get your daughter
Yep.
back or
Yep.
get her this wasn't the knight in shining armor, maybe the next one will be.
Yeah.
And that's not the goal. I mean, the goal would be for the marriage to stay together. The goal would be for them to get it figured out. The goal would be
Yep.
to get them to counseling. That you want
Yes.
them to. I mean, that marriage is meant to be permanent,
Yes.
and so the parent doesn't need to be the wedge there.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think leaving your father and mother that's super important. Those first years of establishing the right boundaries and having a good relationship with them, but at the right boundaries. One of the things we always tell couples is that you never speak a negative word about your spouse to your parents or
Right.
your friends.
Yeah.
There's obviously people that if there's real concerns, there's places that you should be able to voice those concerns
Yeah.
to counselors, to your pastors,
Yeah.
to people who are used to dealing with conflict.
Yeah.
Um,
And caveat, that's not to say that if there's some real abuse going
oh,
on, like you
absolutely.
call the
Please,
police.
absolutely,
Yeah. But
absolutely.
but we're talking
Yeah.
about regular, like
Oh,
I'm just irritated
he
with.
leaves his socks in the
Yeah.
floor. Like I have never spoken a negative word about my wife to
Yes.
my mother
Yes.
ever.
Yes.
Not to my brother, who is my best friend, not to my sister. I, you know, I speak to them as if Jennifer walks on water, and she does. So y'all hear that
That's
too.
easy, huh?
And she does. It's easy to talk about, but um, you don't want to do that because
Right.
that creates these negative relationships. And what happens is, mom, you'll go home and you'll forgive each other and y'all make love and make up.
Yeah. Mom's gonna hold a grudge.
Grudge,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I think another thing that you have to deal with in premarital counseling, but then in the early years of marriage is how your origin story affected you
Yeah.
and what are you bringing into the marriage?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Stacy and I, we learned pretty early on how she learned to communicate in her family, how I learned to communicate in my family were total opposites. And so basically, even to this day, we're better at it. But if we have a fight, it boils down to the fact that I have certain natural communication patterns. She has certain natural communication patterns, and they're completely opposites. And I'm mad at her and she's mad at me because we're not talking about things in a healthy way. We're just, doing these natural things that come from our families of origin.
Right,
And you're gonna figure those things out. Well, you're gonna experience them pretty quickly, and you need to figure them out quickly.
right. That's
so
right.
that you can overcome them and change and adapt to work together in this new family unit.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some things that when you really start looking at your origin story and how you were raised and all of that, there's going to be some good things. I
Yeah,
think everybody's going to have something they can say. This is something my family did. This was a tradition. This was something good.
yeah,
This is a good attribute of my mom. This is a good attribute of my dad. I want to do this. But at the same time, there's going to be some things going. This wasn't healthy in my
yeah,
home growing
yeah,
up.
yeah,
And maybe until you're married, you don't even realize that that was an unhealthy thing until your wife
yeah.
goes, "What are you doing? Why would you do it that way?
Yeah,
Or why would you?"
that was totally us because my family is very peaceful, great family. But like we had a way of just kind of ignoring things, like not we weren't confrontational when there was any sort of issue. You just kind of moved on.
Right.
And Stacy wanted to talk about those things and work them out and not just like pretend like they weren't a big
Right,
deal.
and pass it down the road, which
Yeah.
is what I would do, and then
Yeah.
and then it blows up.
Yeah, and so, we're
So
a healthy family, and it worked for us, but it wasn't working in my new family,
right,
and so I needed to adapt to what needed to
yeah,
happen in the new family.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you are gonna have to figure out what things that you did. I just without this turning into a counseling session, my dad wasn't a a great husband to my mom, and so I didn't learn a lot about how to treat my wife from my dad. But I do look at the good things that my dad did, and I, like, kinda honor them.
Yeah.
And, it may be a little different for me. My dad passed away when I was 17, but
Mm.
there's certain things I do because my dad did them, and I'm like, "That's one of the good things he did. I learned that from him. I'm gonna do it." But,
Yeah.
paying attention to your origin story as the 2 become one flesh and writing a new, healthier story. And here's this kind of, like, one thing I'll say is it's like going to counseling or being in discipleship in the church, being in a
Right.
community group, finding that person, that couple in church that go, "Hey, can we go on a double date?
Yeah.
Can we talk? Can we ask questions?" And
Yeah.
finding somebody you can be real with,
Yeah.
be vulnerable and transparent, and let them help you figure it out. Like there are
Absolutely.
people in our church who have been there, done that. They've got the T-shirt. They've got great godly wisdom. Build a relationship with them, and
Absolutely.
I'm not going to out their names here on the podcast, but if
You
you're
did in the last episode, so
I could out some more, but I've got like a whole like a pretty long list of
Yeah,
people. I'd love to try to match you up with a couple and say, hey, try to
absolutely.
build a relationship with these couples because we have some great godly marriages.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've talked a lot.
Yeah.
You got any parting words of wisdom?
Well, we were going to talk about this and we didn't have time, so I'll just throw it in at the end. Children are a blessing from the Lord, and you have to figure out contraception. That's a whole nother issue. What you're going to do, but let's not have the attitude as Christians that children are a curse, and if you get pregnant on the honeymoon, that's a horrible, horrible thing.
It's not. It's a
It's not.
beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Yep.
Children are a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
They are such a gift. And our world is telling us the opposite.
Yes.
They are, but they are such a gift. And that's a good word, brother.
Mhm.
Um, man, here's mine, and it's similar to yours in the fact that don't believe the lies the world tells you about marriage.
Right. The ball and chain.
Right. Listen, Jennifer says this. It's not all going to be uh, fairy tales, butterfly. I don't know. She's got a whole say. Have to ask her. I just messed it up, but she's got this whole thing. It's not all a fairy tale. It's
Yep.
not all going to be wonderful
Yep.
all of the time.
Yep.
However, it isn't going to be like if the two of you are pursuing the Lord, it's not going to be miserable all
Absolutely.
of the time. It is
Absolutely.
marriage, just like children. Marriage is a gift. God designed it. I know some people listening in their home growing up, their parents' marriage was not a gift,
Yeah.
and so you interpret and look at and view marriage through that lens. Just know there really are good, godly marriages that are a blessing.
Amen.
Amen. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today for Wisdom in the Wilderness. If you found this helpful, be sure to share it, text it around, share it on social media. Uh, I'm getting a lot of stuff from far away now.
Yeah.
People saying, "Hey, listen to that podcast. It was very helpful. Thank you." Had a niece call me last week. Bless me. She goes, "Hey, I listen to
Mhm.
your podcast. Thank you so much for that." And so It would be helpful if you shared that, like, subscribe, and hey, we'll see you right here next week on Wisdom for the Wilderness.